So today, let's talk about quadratic equations. Whenever the graph of a function f of x intersects the x-axis, the f of x equals 0. Remember, in our problems, f of x is the same as y. A value for x, which makes f of x, or y, equal to 0, is called the zero of the function. And one way to solve a quadratic equation is by factoring. To do this, we're going to use the zero product property, which basically says you cannot have any two numbers multiplied together that equal 0 unless one of the numbers equals 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to factor our equation so that we get two factors that equal 0. Factors multiply together to get a product of 0. So in this case, if x plus 5 times x minus 7 equals 0, then we know that one at least of these has to equal 0. So either x plus 5 and or x minus 7 is going to equal 0. If we get a problem in our homework like this, which you will, all you have to do is separate out the two factors and make them equal to 0 and solve for x. Now, this next little bit is not in your notes, and I apologize because it should be somewhere in the margins. This is on my board in purple writing, but you need to write instructions on how to do this. The first thing you're going to do, step 1, is always make everything equal to 0. So that's the very first step you're going to be doing in any of these problems. Then you're going to factor, and factoring might take many steps. It might take one step. So we're not going to put any more steps up here. After you've factored, you're going to set each factor equal to 0. Then solve for x. I'll give you a little time to write that down. Okay, I hope you got that, because now let's do some examples. So here we have x squared equals 6x. Remember, from our instructions on the previous page, we need to make it equal to 0. So we need to get rid of that 6x. That's a positive 6x. So we're going to subtract 6x from both sides. Okay. That gives us x squared minus 6x equals 0. So now that we have solved step 1, where we've gotten it equal to 0, our next step is to factor. Now, this is two terms, so we aren't going to use the big X. We can take the square root of, lost my cursor, of x squared, but we can't take the square root of 6x, so we know it's not the difference of two squares. All we're left with is finding the greatest common factor. And what is the greatest common factor of x squared and 6x? What can we take out of both x squared and 6x? Right, we can take an x out of both of them. So we put an x out front, then a parenthesis, and we take out the x from each one of these. So we get x, parenthesis, x minus 6. We can pretty much ignore the equals there. We have to keep writing it, but we can ignore it while we're factoring. We cannot go any further with this. So our next step is we have two factors here. We're going to separate them out. We have the x, which is equal to 0. And then we have x minus 6, which we put equal to 0. The x equals 0. We have already solved that. We don't need to do anything else. One of our x's, because we're going to end up with 2, is 0. Now, in this other situation, we don't have x all by itself, so we have to get there. So we have a minus 6. We're going to do the opposite and add 6 to both sides. Minus 6 and plus 6 cancel out, so we get x equals 6. And that is our second answer. I'm going to give you a little more time to write this all down. Okay. So we have finished this example. Let's move on to the second example. Oh, look, we have 3 terms. We have an x squared, a 5x, and a minus 24. Step 1 is to make sure we have it equal to 0, which we've already got in the problem, so we don't have to do anything in this case. So how are we going to factor this? Well, we have 3 terms. There's an x here, an x here, and no x here. We have numbers, numbers, but no numbers over here, so we don't have a greatest common factor. So the only thing we have left is our x factor, where we take this last term here and we put it on top of our x, and then we take the number of the middle term, that plus 5, that's going to go down here. Okay, now let's think of 2 numbers that multiply to our top number, negative 24, and add to our bottom number, 5. All right. Yeah, we have 8 and negative 3. 8 times negative 3 is negative 24. 8 plus negative 3 is 5. Now, our variable is an x. So we're going to be putting the x in the front, plus 8, x minus 3, and we keep that equals 0. We finished factoring, right? We took the 8 and we put it here, and the negative 3, and we put it here. Now, we have to split apart our 2 factors and make them both equal to 0. So we have x plus 8 equals 0. And then we do x minus 3 equals 0. Now, all we have to do is solve for x. So we subtract 8 from both sides. We add 3 to both sides. We end up with x equals negative 8 and 3. And this is how you will answer the problems in Math Excel, that they just want a list of possible numbers. So it's not an ordered pair. Do not put parentheses around it. It's just negative 8, comma 3. This one up here, we'd put 0, comma 6 or 6, comma 0. The order doesn't matter because it is just a list of numbers. All right, let's look at this last example we've got here. We have to add 64 to both sides because we have to make that a 0. And the only way to get rid of a negative 64 is to add 64 to both sides. So we end up with x squared minus 16x plus 64 equals 0. How are we going to factor that? Oh, look, it's again 3 terms. 1, 2, 3. So we're going to make our x, and the 64 goes on top. Negative 16 goes on the bottom. And let's think of 2 numbers that multiply to 64 and add to negative 16. If you said negative 8 and negative 8, you're right. Negative 8 times negative 8 equals positive 64. Negative 8 plus negative 8 equals negative 16. So what we end up with as factors, because our variable is an x, is x minus 8 times x minus 8 equals 0. Now, if we're trying to come up with a list of numbers and these are exactly the same, do we need to actually set both of those equal to 0? No. No, we don't. We only have to set one of them equal to 0. So we get x minus 8 equals 0. And if we add 8 to both sides, we get x equals 8. So we only have one root in this situation. I'll give you some time to finish writing all this down. Okay, so remember in this situation, we only have one answer. And another method for finding the roots of quadratic equations is to find the zeros of the related quadratic function. Basically, we solve it by graphing. If we only have one root, like in the last problem, it just comes down, touches the x-axis, and goes right back up. That's what happened when we came up with x equals 8. It was just that one spot where it touched and went back up. Most of our problems will have the parabola crossing 2 points on the x-axis, so we'll have 2 answers. Although we have some experience earlier in this unit where we were graphing our parabolas and they didn't touch the x-axis at all. Those are for complex solutions, which we aren't going to cover until 4-8. So don't worry about these for right now. Most of the time we will either have one real solution or 2 real solutions. Okay, so let's do some graphing. So, what are the solutions of the quadratic equation 2x squared plus 7x equals 15? Well, step 1, we always have to make it equal to 0. So we have to subtract 15 from both sides. And this has an x, this doesn't, so we cannot combine them. So we get 2x squared plus 7x minus 15 equals 0. Now that we have this, let's use our calculators. Terrific. First thing to do is turn on your calculator. Then you're going to hit the y equals button, which is at the top left of your TI-84. Then, once you have hit the y equals button, it should look like this. Okay, if there is something in here in the y equals, clear it out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to enter this part of the equation. So don't enter the equals 0. Don't worry about that. And because we always make it equal to 0, we can not worry about that. So we just want to push this in, and that's that X button. You're going to use the button next to the green alpha button to make your X, like we've done before. Okay, once you've done that, you're going to hit enter. So now it's in your y equals, just like this. You've hit enter. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to hit the second button. It's the little blue button above the green alpha button in the top left corner. Then you're going to hit the trace button, which is the 4th button from the left at the very top. And in little blue letters, it says calc. Okay. Then you're going to hit the down arrow so that 2:0 is highlighted, and you're going to hit enter. What should appear is a graph. I'm going to give you a little time to write all this in. All right. If you've got it all written in and you have your calculator with me where we're at, if you don't, pause the video until everybody is caught up. If you're in class, if you're not in class, pause the video until you're caught up. Okay. I'm going to assume we're all caught up. So what you should do next is you should have a graph like this, and you'll have some numbers up here, and down here it'll say left bound question mark, and it might say x equals a number, and it'll say y equals something. Mine says x equals 0, y equals negative 15. You can start either here or here, but where we're going to start is at this one, so we're doing the same problem. So you're going to want to move your cursor, your little spider looking thing, using only the left or right buttons from this point. When you're trying to move your spider, you're only using the left or right buttons. So if you're at x equals 0, like I am, you're here, so you're going to want to pay attention to this number and pay attention to this number. You want to get this number as close to 0 as you can. So hit the left arrow until your y becomes positive. If your y is already positive and getting better, hit the right arrow. But hit the left arrow until, whoops, I went past it, until your little spider looking thing shows up. And my little spider thing either is above or below just a little bit, and that's okay as long as it's as close as you can get it to the line. Now, when it says left bound with a question mark, hit the left arrow one time, then hit enter. I know this says get above the x-axis, but this method will be the same if you're working on this point or this point. Now, once you've hit the left button and hit enter, it should say on your bottom down here, right bound with a question mark. So you're going to hit your right arrow 2 times and then hit enter. Okay. Hopefully everybody is with me. The next thing you're going to do, it says guess with a question mark. I don't feel like hitting guess because I don't feel like guessing. So I'm just going to hit enter. Then what happens is this is what your calculator should say. It should say 0, saying this is the 0 where the x is negative 5. That makes the y or the f of x equal to 0. So that's our first 0. Now we're going to go back to this side and do it all over again. So after you found this 0, after you find the first 0, start again at the other x-intercept. Repeat the instructions or the steps from this asterisk right here. So once again, we are at here. We're going to go back here and hit the second button, which is our blue button. Then the trace button, which says calc right above it. Our down arrow 1 time so that 2:0 is highlighted. Then hit enter. Now, it says left bound with a question mark, but we're way over here and we want to be here. So my asterisk, my little spider is right here and I need him to be there. So I'm going to hit the right arrow. Remember, these ones we hit the right or left arrows only. Don't hit the up or down. But I'm going to hit the right arrow until I can get, ooh, I'm almost exactly on the line, until I can get that little spider guy right as close as I can to the line. And then we're going to follow these same instructions with the left arrow and the right arrow. Okay, so it says left bound with a question mark down here. So we're going to hit the left arrow one time, which goes below the x-axis on this side. Then we're going to hit enter. Now down here, where did my little, there it is. It's going to say right bound with a question mark. So we're going to hit the right arrow 2 times. And that'll take it above the x-axis. And then we hit enter. And then it'll say guess with a question mark. And if you'd like to guess, you can guess. I don't guess because I don't need to. I can just hit enter. I'm lazy like that. And then this is what your calculator should look like. Your x is 1.5 and your y is 0 because we're looking for where what x makes the y 0. If your y says something like 1.1111 e negative 62, what that means is 1.11 times 10 to the negative 62, which is 0. Or if it says 9.99 e negative whatever, that's also 0. So if there's an e in here and a big number, don't worry about it. Okay, so we have done this twice and we've had these 2 screens show up. So our solutions are -5 and 1.5. In Math Excel, if you're doing this on one that says factor, and it says 1.5, you are going to have to turn that into a decimal, into a fraction, because it'll need to be 3/2. If it is one that says in little purple writing, round to the nearest hundredth, then you can leave it like this. I'm going to leave this last page up here for a minute so you can make sure you have all these instructions written down. Or you can pause the video and make sure you've got it all. I also am going to try and upload a little video of me working on my calculator to demonstrate the steps where you can see the buttons. I hope everyone is staying healthy and that this isn't too much trouble. Yeah. Work hard, do your homework. Have a great day.